Good morning and congratulations, first of all, on the huge audience that we had yesterday. I was already astonished by the more than 200 registered participants yesterday morning when we started, and then even more astonished by the huge percentage of those who managed to attend and also stayed with us until the end. We were a bit concerned about the participation in the last panel, the one that I chaired in the afternoon, and more than half of those who were attending in the meeting in the morning, they were still there in the meeting during the afternoon. So my first comment here is that we probably discovered an interesting area for further research and action. And I gather today the discussion will be more on action, while yesterday it was more on research. But the two things together are very promising, look promising to me at least, and I would then ask for the opinion of Davide, who will speak after me, and I will try to be very short to give to him the opportunity of talking about the research implications, but also the practical implications. It's always good to hear from different perspectives. I know Davide is quite close to our project, but at the same time, he's not, for example, among those who wrote it or made the initial thoughts. So it's very important and challenging that we receive even negative feedback on specific parts that need improvement. So to summarize, yesterday I got the feeling that we are seated on something very promising. And so one of the questions, not only for me, but also for today's agenda of activities as Irene presented to us before, one of the questions is, why is it so intriguing, the combination of topics that we presented yesterday and we will be also discussing about later on today and during this project. I don't want to make it long, as I said, but I think there are three keywords we should consider with closer attention. As I said, not only in the future, but also today for the participants in the working groups, whom I thank for being here, and also for the preparatory work. We should never forget that there was a huge preparatory work before each and every working group to be deployed, and so the contents, I think, will also be more interesting, and I will be eager to know more about the results of the three working groups because of this preparatory work. So the three keywords. One is obviously culture. Culture is one of the words I personally don't like because it means everything and therefore nothing. But yesterday, especially during my session, I don't want to monopolize, and so I ask Davide for confirmation, but especially in my session, but probably also in the previous one coordinated by Luis, I got the perception that an interesting direction that research and probably action is taking, probably also due to the COVID-19 crisis, is to abandon the consolidated viewpoint that culture is what culture gives you. And so exhibitions, paintings, books, and we are in some, to some extent, resuming the old view that culture is what works in everyone's brains. And this is especially what Pierluigi Sacco proposed in his speech. I had a friendly discussion after the end of the day with him. Why didn't you prepare slides for your speech? We might have lost something, and so on and so forth. And he said, based on my experience, when you have to speak for 20 minutes, it is better not to have slides, which is an intriguing point of view, but still pointing at the same thing. We were interested yesterday in the mechanism of influence, let me use this word, that comes from the outputs of culture and goes into people's brains. And this has been, to some extent, associated with the second keyword, which was floating in the air, social impact. Social impact, not only because of the title of the conference, the workshop, but also because of the title of our project and the goals that we have. So social impact means something that is located in the brains and probably also in the hearts of people. And this brings me to the third keyword, which I pretend to be artificial intelligence. Not because it stands at the same theoretical level, but probably because this is part of the interest that we have raised with this workshop and our project. If we compare our work plan in MESOC, and I am saying this with great respect, with the work plans of the other two sister projects belonging to our same cluster, and incidentally, some of the partners in MESOC are also partners in either of these two projects, so they can confirm what I'm about to say or criticize it, and so happy to hear about your comments. While on the one hand, they clearly belong to the same conceptual roots, they all have well in mind the target of exploring the influence mechanisms from culture to people's brains and the return or feedback mechanisms from people's brains into culture using expressions like values, for example. I think they are, to some extent, different and for me less interesting, but this is a personal comment, especially because they might be stopping at the level of needing an additional instrument like artificial intelligence, but then not using it, not formulating this need to the extent that it becomes a requirement, and therefore what we can think of having, but not today and not maybe with this interesting audience of city representatives, is a discussion on whether artificial intelligence could support also the two sister projects, not just our own work plan of activities. And it is in this regard that I welcome the work that is expected at the level of the three parallel groups today to try and figure out ways in which artificial intelligence can help us solve some of the issues or tackle some of the challenges related to analyzing the influence of cultural outputs on people's brains and vice versa. So these three keywords for me can be part of the reason why we were so attractive. And I take globally the results of this workshop as a strong encouragement to continue along this track and also be very visible to the external world. So let's also think of additional ways to organize public events, exploiting, unfortunately, the current lockdown situation, not only as general initiatives of the consortium of MESOC partners, but also individual initiatives that, for example, Politecnico di Milano might want to organize in the near future, maybe in Italian, why not? So the same could be for the city of Athens in Greece, or other city representatives who are here. They might want to have a thought on that. I believe sincerely that we have not only the time, not only the resources, but also the best interest in exploring further this new wave of collaboration opportunities, which, as Grazia Concilio said yesterday, are not seen by us as a way to superimpose our views of the world, but especially as a learning opportunity. Because here we are still in an exploration phase. The topic is new, the domain is probably needing a bit of restoration or revamping. And so whatever comes up is hardly good at the first shot. We will probably need to have more shots, more confirmations, and it is also in this regard that I welcome the activities today and the conclusions that will come from the 3 parallel groups. Thank you, and now, Davide, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I also want to congratulate with the organizers and the whole group for doing a great job. Very rich first day. I was given the dreadful and almost impossible task of trying to summarize what happened today. I'm really glad that Professor Molinari already started and in a way covered key points. So basically what I am going to do is to try to energize, kickstart a bit today, which is going to be a more hands-on day, by sharing some of the notes I've been taking. Since I don't assume that everybody who's in today was also attending yesterday's sessions and was attentive, because we know also this way of being involved in these events is quite different from what we are used to. Before I start with my sharing of ideas, mostly some names, some of those are very important, but I ask to forgive me if I just mention some of them, even maybe very few of them, but I will do that with a bias, and Professor Molinari already anticipated what I was going to say, because I am an urban person, planner by training, so the city perspective is in part intrinsic of with what I'm going to say, as well as I will try to keep a critical eye on the exercise of yesterday, and as I was asked more generally. So basically, I think since the very early few words we heard yesterday of welcome by the department's head and the unit coordinator here, the question of evaluation itself is a big question. And as long as we are entering somewhat uncharted territories, we have to be aware that the exercise is everything but neutral. So this is something that recurred over the day. I think that was a very good questioning kind of position to start with. And that resonates also well with the questioning that derived from the first keynote by Der Lorbach about organizations and the persistency of organizations and institutions in particular throughout different phases of development, and what he clearly explained as transition. The only thing that can save us, apparently, is reflectivity. And the ability of zooming out, abstracting, understanding, a larger picture is something that is valuable and I think indispensable in the kind of exercise that MESOC has been, started to do. But I also would stress once again the fact that this poses a radical question, which is about disruption, basically, and also some of the comments that came about by Professor Balducci as well as by Professor Negrier were about how far we can reform organizations or disrupt them, and how far we have to look at these processes and how culture, in a way, can be a motor. Cultural policy can be a motor for that positive changes, adapting the organization, the city in some cases or others, or we have to look for really radical changes. I think also Julie Hervé provided a terrific amount of examples, good examples of what is going on now. Yet, in a way, this also brought us to think about the nature of the phase in which we are currently. And again, Professor Negrier, in a way, gave a definition which I want to stress, because also was picked up later during the day, of a transition of one world, one state of things into another, rather than a total disruption. I think this idea, it's something that it's close to some of the examples we are going to dig in during the research. The radical question also posed by him is if cultural policy is a good tool for this kind of transition. And as far as I understand, the MESOC needs also to search for these worlds before, during, and after transition, then try to measure some of the variables that, in a way, apparently or more substantially contribute to this transition, and possibly start measuring them. The modeling part proved to be also throughout the debates something very critical, very complex, and in a way good, because it's problematic. As long as it's not something taken for granted, I think will generate good payoffs of research. Of course, I like this kind of more radical questions, and of course, being myself, having myself an urban perspective, also not being sure at the end of the day if the scale of observation of the city, rather than the metropolitan area, rather than larger regions, rather than a different reality, digital, physical reality we are in, are what we need to observe from close in order to measure these variables. Again, the comeback of Professor Lorbach, I think, is somewhat of a warning in the same direction. So cultural systems may be stuck with what they do, and they constitute regimes. And in a way, policymaking constitutes a regime. I brought to the attention the debate on urban regimes and the work on growth machines, Harvey Moloch and others. But that work by a number of urban sociologists, as well as what Professor Lorbach explained, tells very clearly that we, as academics, researchers, organizations, are part of the regime. So in our exercise, we need reflexivity. This is a big takeaway, and I think it may sound a bit simplistic, but I think it will take a lot of effort to try to see ourselves as part of this process. More briefly, I will just stress the fact that both Professor Barata and Professor Bianchini later stressed the fact that this tension between transition and resistance, and the organizations reproducing themselves is something that punctuated history of cultural policy in the last 78 years. 3 projects, EU projects, were presented. I will skip that and jump to some of the takeaway messages of Professor Bianchini in the same line as I mentioned before. So basically, the idea is that the logic of that governs cultural policies may be simply reproduced, and the role of evaluation, of assessment, of exercises like this project is quite uncomfortable. So I think as long as we don't feel at ease during our exercise, we are doing a good job. Meaning that Professor Bianchini clearly stressed that the role of evaluation, unfortunately, has been tamed to some extent in policymaking, and in a way as a motor of reproduction of the same logics that of the past. Since we are looking for transition and to measure that, us ourselves as a group of researchers should in a way not only observe it, but in a way work in that direction, also in terms of sparking reform debates, as Francesco Molianri told very, very clearly. Other organizations are carrying out similar projects, the UNESCO with Culture 2030 indicators. That reminded me, some 10 years ago, the OECD consulted me and other experts for somewhat a similar exercise that in the end didn't take off, but the idea was already circulating, and it's apparently the fact that it didn't deliver a substantial advancement then makes me think that it's needed, but it's not sure that it's going to be changing the policy realm in which we are. So moving forward, I simply would like to encourage this kind of frank and critical assessments. I'm quoting Professor Bianchini, also towards the examples and pilots we are going to work with ourselves today, as well as in the coming months and years, as it would be too simple to reiterate some of the narratives that will lock ourselves in the previous state of things. So I think that altogether, the large part of the yesterday's debate was, in a nutshell, a warning for the research groups for a critical eye and observing transition in order to be part of it, rather than risking reproducing the opposite. I think that Francesco Molianri did a great job in summarizing the last session, so I will skip that altogether. But I want to stress what Jesse Marsh very cleverly cited from Manuel Castells by saying that technology is nor good nor bad nor neutral, and so do we. I think in a way the difficulty of taking and holding dear the message of Professor Lorbach is in a way to see this exercise as policy action and as a way to in a way free ourselves from impairment in evaluating cultural policy, the impacts, and the way in which transition eventually works. I was a bit longer than expected, but I hope that this will, in a way, refresh the ideas that bounced back and forth yesterday, as well as energize a bit the participants for the fantastic work we have ahead for today's session. Thank you.